There are so many things going on, especially if it's your first child. Things are all over the place. And also the identity shift. Who am I now? Your identity can be lost. You can lose yourself. Welcome to the Dad Central Show, the podcast that helps overwhelmed dads conquer stress, build confidence, and become the father their family brags about. Join Drew Solon, a leadership coach and father of 5, and Ed Gow Jr., a fatherhood advocate and contributor to the Good Men Project, as we guide you through the journey of fatherhood. We'll show you how to connect deeply with your family, manage your time and energy better, and master tools to become the dad you want to be. Let's get started. What if I told you 1 in 10 you dads experience postpartum depression? But most never talk about it, and many don't even realize what they're feeling has a name. You can briefly see that a lot of research is out there, and there's organizations like Postpartum Support International and the National Institute of Mental Health showing that paternal postpartum depression rates range from 8 to 13%, often peaking 3 to 6 months after birth. So today we're going to really focus in on breaking the silence around paternal postpartum depression and redefining what strength looks like for dads. So on today's conversation, we're going to be talking about postpartum health isn't just for moms, dads, and depression. And we're also going to look at things like, we talk a lot about moms, and Mother's Day just finished, and rightly so. But dads are struggling too, just more quietly. So the risk increases in a relationship if the partner is also struggling along with the mom. So Drew, what are your thoughts on this conversation today?
I'm going to start by sharing a story. Back in 2023, I was invited onto a radio show based out of Calgary, and it was around Father's Day, and they said, yeah, we're really interested in some of this information you have on your website about postpartum depression. So I'm invited on the show. We start talking. They're asking some questions, and they start really probing and getting really almost a little bit adversarial. And then anyways, we go through the conversation. I'm, relieved of being on the show anymore, but I'm still in the green room listening. And within about 30 seconds of me getting off, the male host says whatever he was going to say. And then the female host, she very clearly was like, I don't buy it. I don't believe this. And I don't think that dads are struggling. It's just, and so she was very not in support or not in belief that fathers have difficulty around it, and was very much of the moms are the ones who are really struggling, and this is ridiculous that we're talking about it with dads. Unfortunately, that I think is a common perception. Maybe it was just her, but I think it's true that it's really hard, and we've seen articles and we've seen commentary that it's hard for dads to even acknowledge it because they don't feel like they're going to be received well. And we'll talk more specifically about it through the show, but it was surprising because what they essentially tried to do was set me up. They had an agenda and they wanted to kind of derail it. So it was a very memorable experience, to say the least. And I was like, we had facts and data. We've done research with Dr. Jessica Ball, the University of Victoria, looked at over 245 different studies. One of the key findings was, postpartum depression is completely underreported. It's also completely undersupported. And there's actually no natural screening for it where it's automatic for mothers. So there's a lot of gaps and cracks. So even while the data says up to 10%, the reality is it's probably more. Anyways, we'll keep going from there. That's how I wanted to start in terms of it's a conversation that I think needs to be had more.
Good stuff. So before we go any further, as always, our show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes care is the best of a man because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. And also, don't forget, send us your questions. Email us at podcast@dadcentral.ca. We'd love to answer them live online when we're doing a recording, not live online, when we're doing a recording. So we're going to cover these areas today. What is postpartum depression? Well, sorry, correct that. What is paternal postpartum depression? Also, why it happens. Also, the costs of ignoring it. Then signs to watch for. And finally, what dads can do. So, Drew, let's open it up with what is postpartum, paternal postpartum depression?
Okay. I have to start with a disclaimer. We are not mental health professionals. I am a professional coach. Ed is a professional coach. And what we're going to be sharing is information on symptoms or what things you may experience. But in order to officially know if it's paternal postpartum depression, you would need to go see a mental health professional and get a diagnosis. Okay. So we want to start with that. We are not diagnosing anything just because you hear it on the podcast, but it's a way for you to understand if it would be helpful for you to get some support. That said, essentially, it's experiencing emotional, mental, or behavioral changes after the period of becoming a father. And so, how it differs, we'll say, from typical stress, and yes, we know that becoming a father is one of the most stressful, challenging transitions a man will have in his life. But it's just like with anything, it's not a transient thing. It doesn't come and go, it becomes much more persistent and stays around. So, persistent irritability, persistent withdrawal, persistent fatigue, or persistent just loss of interest or loss of your general, I'll use the word faculties, your general sense of well-being the way you might normally be. And so the way that it often shows up a little bit uniquely in fathers is that we might become much more angry as opposed to sad. Moms, the baby blues, they're sad, they're crying, but in men it comes out more as anger. Things like escapism. So we might just be like, I got to get away from all this. And that might cause you to go bury yourself in work, could go bury yourself in gaming or other distractions. If you have or are now experimenting with substances, it could become a substance use issue where you're escaping from the difficult emotions or the challenges you're experiencing, or just feeling a generally huge disconnect from your partner or from the baby. Okay, so those are just some things to consider in terms of what it would look like.
Well, let's move on next to why it happens. What are some of the potential causes of this uh, challenge with fathers and men, Drew?
Yeah, so I guess you could look at four different buckets might contribute to it. One is biological factors. Second would be some psychological factors or psychological pressures. Third factor or bucket could be lifestyle shock. As I said, it's a huge transition. Or four, which I think is a big one, is social conditioning. So if you look at each of those buckets, those can contribute to the experience of paternal postpartum depression. And we'll talk individually about each of them. I'll start with the first one, Ed, and we'll just go back and forth. So when it comes to biology, the reality is that men experience hormone changes around the time of a birth of a baby as well as after the birth of a baby. So your testosterone drops, your cortisol fluctuates, vasopressin, and a few of the other hormones are also affected. And so these are actually positive, healthy, but you may experience them differently, and it may contribute when wrapped up with the other three we talk about to an onset of potential paternal postpartum depression. But the reality is hormones change. They're intended to help fathers become more connected to and involved in the parenting and relationship development process with their child, as well as caregiving and support, as well as protection for the family. So they're all actually positive, good things. But for some men, that may be confusing based on, if we talk about number four, and we will, social conditioning. So Ed, you want to talk about the psychological pressure?
Yeah, when I saw this in the notes we compiled, we could just do a show on this provider expectations. And there is a lady therapist who I really, really respect. And a few days ago, she was doing a session online, and she was very adamant that the whole thing about men being a provider, it has to be redefined because there's a traditional definition of provider. She was very strong in saying men as a provider expectations, we need to redefine that in 2026, big time. And also the identity shift. Who am I now? Who am I now? There are so many things going on, especially if it's your first child. Things are all over the place. And sometimes your identity can be lost. You can lose yourself. So I think both those things, the shift in identity and also the provider expectations are very, very, very large. And it's not it's not talked about enough. And I think maybe down the line we can do a separate show of just about the whole provider expectations as a dad. Let's go to lifestyle shock.
Yeah. I'm going to add one more in before we go to lifestyle shock. And it's around identity. You as a dad may want to be highly involved, which we know the research proves a lot of dads care deeply about their fatherhood role. And what may emerge is some of the difficulties around connection, some of the difficulties around the relationship, some of the difficulties balancing the demands of work and home. And you may find yourself not showing up as the father that you thought you would be or the father you want to be. And so that identity may also cause internal conflict in you, and that I thought I'd be a better dad, or I thought I'd be able to handle this better, or I thought I'd this is not what I expected it to be. And I think that also contributes to that psychological pressure. It's all tied in to either provider or whatever you want to say, but that's another component. If you are working hard at it and trying to be a great dad and trying to be supportive, but you're not doing it in the way that it's not going the way that you expected, that can also be a lot of pressure. So lifestyle shock, the reality is things change significantly. For me, that was increased because I had twins to start off as my foray into fatherhood. So sleep deprivation is very real, very limiting. The relationship, significant changes. Now, men tend to feel the relationship changes more significantly than moms because moms are so connected to the baby, from even before birth to once they're born. Now, the other thing that can happen is if your partner is experiencing some postpartum, you may see not the relationship in terms of between the mom and the baby, which could be distressing for you, or it could be affecting your relationship with your partner who might be experiencing postpartum depression as well. So there's so many things that go in, but the reality is relationship changes and that requires adjustment and that can create more stress and tension or uncertainty. Anyways, Ed, you want to talk about the final one, social conditioning?
Now, there's another topic that we could spend a whole show chatting about. There's always a quote you hear: "Men don't talk about feelings." I push back on that because I chat with a lot of men when it comes to feelings, and that conditioning is another thing that definitely I think we need to have a conversation in 2026 about not talking about their feelings. We do talk about our feelings, but we also have to realize we don't know what type of environment that man grew up in. Maybe their dad or their male caregiver never talked about feelings, so they're not used to it. So, again, a lot of times there's a label put on without viable research and data. Let me put it that way. It's a generalization, let alone a stereotype. We do talk about our feelings. So, there we go with social conditioning. Anything you want to add to that, Drew?
Yeah, I'll add in there. Sometimes the expectations that we've put on ourselves come from those who are around us who may not be we might be working a little bit on autopilot because we see everyone else around us and we're like, oh well, I got to be that way, or by unhealthy influences. There's this idea of this manosphere where you have people who are like, some might call it toxic masculinity or whatever. At the end of the day, I don't really care what it's called. The point is, it's not grounded in you as a father knowing what truly matters to you and the values that you hold, and being pulled away or influenced untowardly by those other things when you inside know it matters to you. And so I think there's a lot of garbage that's consumed on these devices through these screens that can change our thoughts or ideas or perspectives that don't align with what we actually truly want inside. And that can create some of that social conditioning or our families of origin and all those other things. So I think there's so much that could go into that. But the more that you become conscious and aware of what is influencing you out there socially and how it's impacting how you show up at home, then you can become more aware of okay, well, how do I move forward from this? And does it align with who I truly am and what really matters to me?
Let's get into the costs of ignoring it.
Well, just like that squeaky brake or that knocking in the engine in your car, if you don't address it early, often it leads to much more significant or devastating results down the road. And the same thing with this. If you ignore this, it leads to potentially disastrous results, both for you, for your those who are close to you, and often for your family. And the reality is that your relationships are impacted by it if you don't get the help and support to work through it. Your parenting is often significantly impacted. You're less tolerant, you're less patient, you're less aware, you're less present, you're less engaged because you're all wrapped up in dealing with what you're dealing with. And ultimately, we know that there's great proof that the longer that you've been experiencing a mental health difficulty without some support, it's more likely it's become deeper and harder to work through. So we've got lots of research how kids are affected. You know, the more that we have experiencing mental health challenges as parents, the greater likelihood that our children are going to experience the same type of mental health challenges. So, you know, and your presence as a father impacts kids just as much as mom's mental health as well. So, dads, this is really important for not only for ourselves but also for our children and our partners.
Yeah. What are some signs we can watch for?
Yeah, why don't we go back and forth on this, Ed? So, pretty quick, increased anger or frustration, especially when you normally wouldn't be expressing it.
Then I'll follow up with emotional numbness. You don't have feelings for anything.
Significant withdrawal from family and or friends. There's a natural element in terms of, you know, you're focusing on your immediate family, and so you may not be as connected to your friends. But if you're intentionally withdrawing from those people who are closest to you in your circle, that's something to look out for.
Then risky behaviors or coping habits. Got to be aware of those things, especially if you know those habits are not good for you. That is a sign to watch for.
Yeah. And feeling like you're failing, but not saying it out loud or having a place where you can actually communicate that safely to others.
So let's end it off with what dads can do. What can they do, Drew?
Well, first, I think you have to recognize it's more common than you think. And there are a lot who experience this type of postpartum paternal depression. And so, first and foremost, resources, people around you. Talk to somebody who's trusted, right? Somebody who is you can confide in, and they're going to be there in an understanding, accepting, Ed, as you like to say, somebody who's safe, but it's also brave space where you can actually share honestly. Over to you, Ed.
Next up, prioritize sleep where possible. And it's interesting. Just recently, I saw a gentleman who was in town. Many years ago, he had an Instagram platform called Sleep is for Suckers. Now, he doesn't run that with that anymore, but sleep is so important, not only physically, but emotionally, mentally wise. Sleep is a wonderful thing. It provides your body grace and your body and your mind grace. So try to, I'm going to suggest, if you can, depending where you are in your stage of dadhood, at least 6 hours of sleep a night. I know with new dads, that's easier said than done, but whatever you can get to sleep, even if you can take 15-minute naps during the day or 15-minute naps, take advantage of it. It will be a re-energizer for you physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
Yeah. It generally just taking care of yourself. So staying physically active is always great. The reality is the greatest intervention you can ever have for every aspect of your health is to exercise, right? There's nothing better for every aspect of your health, physical, mental, emotional, right? That's what you got to do. The more you're physically active, and even a 10-minute, 15, 20-minute walk is better than nothing. So everyone, for the most part, I would imagine, I can't speak for everybody, but
Yeah, and finally, I'll just end off, check in with yourself regularly. Do you check in with yourself on a daily basis? If there's something not feeling right, are you paying attention to that or say, oh, it'll go away? check in with yourself. You know when, well, I believe everyone knows when they're functioning right and they're not functioning right, but do a check in regularly before someone else finds out that you're not checking in right. So, just to end off this, asking for help is leadership, not weakness. So as we go over what we chatted about today, which is important topic, really important topic, we talked about what's postpartum depression. We talked about why it happens, the cost of ignoring it, signs to watch for, and then finally what dads can do. And our core takeaways today is depression, isn't just a mom issue. It is not. Dads are impacted and affected too. It also shows up differently in men, making it easy to miss. And then finally, talking about it early can prevent deeper struggles later. And as I like to say here in a closing line, if you're a dad feeling off, overwhelmed, or just not like yourself, you're not alone and you don't have to figure it out on your own. Drew, what's our resource for our family today?
Our resource is an organization called Heads Up Guys. They're built with support from Movember, and they are focused specifically on men experiencing depressive symptoms. Great resource, headsupguys.org. We'll include it in the show notes so that there's a quick, easy link there.
Fantastic. And the Heads Up Guys does incredible work. So as always, I want to say thank you for giving the most important thing, your time to hang out with us today. As always, don't just manage your time, manage your energy. Remember to give yourself grace, and we'll chat with you soon. Be well.